Welcome back to a special edition of Popes and Pylons, an After Action Report. Today I'm going to talk about our past run as Avaria in Europa Universalis 4, where we went for the Avar Khaganate achievement. I'm going to talk in detail about what we did to get to our goal, but as you can already think about yourself, that's going to contain a lot of spoilers. So if you haven't seen my Let's Play series yet, maybe stop the video right now, go in there, see the Let's Plays and then come back. Or if you don't care about that, if you just care about the summary of the whole thing, then just stay around and listen to me talk about the wars, the diplomacy, what went well, what you shouldn't try at home but still went well, and what really didn't work out at all. Let's go right into that. So our initial plan was to go for the Avar Khaganate achievement, which means we have to start as Avaria, a little small, little tiny one province minor that's even a subject of Gazimuk, a gigantic 2-province nation over next to the Great Horde. And we have to not only grow to an empire, which means we have to have 1,000 development in our provinces, but we also had to go and conquer all of Hungary, or what used to be Hungary, as you'll see later on in the run. And this obviously is not a trivial task. You're very, very small, you're very, very powerful neighbors, and you have to sort of break out and become powerful enough to fight your way through to Hungary and also take all of Hungary. And there were a lot of issues on the way, which we're going to talk about. Roughly, our plan was to go and grab a lot of powerful friends, because you need powerful friends to support your independence at the beginning, to get out of your independent or your non-independence, your dependency relationship with your overlord, Gazimuk in this case. And then you also need powerful friends to fight some wars for you, to actually be able to get some power by yourself. Because by just fighting on your own, you're not going to do much here. You have no troops. We started with 2,000 troops, with a force limit of 3,000 troops. Our overlord already had 6,000 troops. So alone, there's no way we're going to fight so well in this war that we're just going to do it alone. So we needed friends. So a lot of this game went for, at the start, the plan at the start was grab powerful friends and have these friends do things for us. Of course, there were a bunch of major issues on our way there, and some of which we could already see at the start. One was we would have to either befriend the Ottomans or deal with the gigantic Ottomans next door. We would probably have to go to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth to get through to Hungary, and we'd have to fight all the hordes north and east of us. So a very, very difficult sort of position. We had terrible ideas, a terrible set of ideas. We start out with a bad ruler, even worse heir, and everything is just stacked against us. But let's see how we went about fixing all that. So, diplomacy and its extension, war. I said we need powerful friends. And as the start of our run, we had to find a friend or 2 friends maybe that supported our independence from our overlord Gazimuk, hopefully allowing us to take the Gazimukian land on the way. So what we did was befriend the Great Horde and befriend our neighbor Circassia. And I thought about taking Circassia because Circassia has this interesting national idea of increasing the coring cost. So it's not really land you want to take, because Circassian land is so much more expensive in admin or diplo to core. So I thought making Circassia my friend would be a good idea, because we don't want to fight them, take their land anyway. And the Great Horde was just a powerful monster on top of us that we would need anyway to break free. So that's pretty much exactly what we did. We went in, improved relations with these 2 neighbors, drew up the support independence agreements with them, meanwhile just insulting our overlords so we wouldn't be too friendly with them, and building up the tiny bit of the army that we could. Once it came to the war, so we declared independence, we had enough support, we declared independence, we just ran away with our army, had the Great Horde and Circassia swoop in, do a lot of work for us, and then in the end we were actually able to do a tiny bit of that ourselves. One thing that was maybe important for us to do was, before the war, we set all the provinces of Gazimuk as of being of interest for us, vital interest for our country. And what that does is tell your ally, oh, this is reserved by your ally, and give that land over to us. So the Great Horde, when they conquered all the Gazimuk territory, they gave control over that to us, so that in the peace deal we could actually say all of this land should belong to us, which is what we did. The first big act of diplomacy leading into war, where we didn't do a lot, but still gained a lot of land. And there were quite a few other wars in which we basically used our allies the same way. Later on, even the Ottomans. Now, we had this friend in Circassia, we had this friend in the Great Horde, and what happened immediately after we expanded into the land of Gazimuk was that we became a tributary to the Great Horde instead of becoming their ally. That way we didn't have to join their wars, they would protect us, but we'd also have to give them a bit of tribute. But we had their protection. And that turned out to be not very useful for very long, because they got attacked by tons of powerful neighbors, like Muscovy in the top, like the hordes on the other side, and they lost a lot of their land. And oddly enough, that's the first bug we encountered in this run, was when they lost one of those wars, they actually gave away our land. When they were forced to release Gazimuk, they actually released the land that we had from Gazimuk in addition to one of their own provinces. A bug that has apparently since been fixed, but back then it was really annoying because we got reduced back to one province minor, so we had to go back, fight actually a war of our own to get Gazimuk back. But looking at the occupation, this should end soon. Feels like it should end very soon. We've lost the Conquest Castle against Great Horde. Gained it against Gazimuk, so they revived Gazimuk. That's... What? 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 That was my land. What the hell? I mean... I've coursed and everything. You just revive them, give them their land back? I am... Wow. I mean, clearly we're gonna go and immediately murderize Gazimuk in a second, but how can they just take away my land like that? I wasn't even in the war. What? Wow. And from there on, we just started rolling. The Great Horde was no longer a very powerful ally, but we found another, much more powerful ally. First, we tried to ally Akyunlu. They turned out to be not that useful, actually. We used them in one war, a war that I'm going to talk later about in the Don't Do This at Home Kids area of the video, but they didn't do much in that war either. Otherwise, we helped them in a war and they didn't do much else. They were very powerless, and then they got attacked by the Ottomans, and we luckily weren't called in there, so we didn't have to break the alliance, but basically lost all our chances of using them for anything because they were just gone. But that other person, enemy, friend I just mentioned, the Ottomans, actually turned out to be really useful, because the Ottomans rarely have tons of alliances. They don't really find a lot of allies for whatever reason, so they still had an open ally slot rather late in the game, so we could improve relations with them, royally marry them, and then become their ally. And yes, that meant we got called into wars, like a war against the Mamluks, in which we were actually sieged down a bit, because the Ottomans were sort of losing or winning the war at first, but then getting into a different war and then starting to lose, and the stuff of ours got sieged down. But we could also use the Ottomans for powerful defense and even more powerful offense, just calling them into a couple of wars to really help us establish ourselves as a power that has to be reckoned with. Another thing that was really important in this diplomacy sort of war area that we're talking about here was the timing of attacks. And this is important to Urban Universalis in general. It's extremely important, especially if you're a small nation that doesn't have a lot of power. You have to find the right time to actually declare your war. And there are a couple of reasons here. One is you don't want your opponent's allies to be called into the war. Oftentimes you have very complicated large sets of alliances, and if you declared war on somebody, they would call in all their friends, and then you would have to find a gigantic opposing army, and it's much easier to call in defensively than offensively. So even if you have strong allies, it can be very difficult if the opponent is able to call in all their allies. Now, what you can do is watch for them going to war, for the allies of the target that you're looking for to go to war, and keep checking, keep having a diplomat free, keep checking the reasons for agreement to defense in that war, to find the exact timing where the allies of your target maybe are not willing to join because they're in a different war, because they're very overextended, they have a lot of loans, they have no manpower, etc. So there are reasons why these people say, well, right now it's kind of not a good time for war, and that's the time you want to pick, that's the time you want to go in. And we did that over and over and over and over again in this campaign. I think it's one of the core things that happened here. The other one is to attack when somebody else is already attacking. And there were a couple of wars that we had, like a war against Nogai, for example. Also a war against the Commonwealth, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, later on, where they actually got into the Evangelical League War. And we knew this war would fire at some point, so we waited for this war to fire and then jumped in and took all the land that we needed to get actually over to Hungary. So two real big attack timings here. One is look for allies to not be able to join the war, opponent's allies, of course. The other is look for your opponent to be at war so that they're busy. Other people are sort of helping you with your own war. And there's a third one. It's not as important, but technology can be a big timing thing. If you're ahead on military technology, your troops are much stronger. And there are certain technology levels where it's really noticeable, especially tactics levels, especially early on. Tactic levels like 5 and 6, I think, in military technology are super strong. And we used that to declare war when we had the advantage, when we had additional strength in our troops because of this this technology that they didn't have yet, to attack and to just fight their armies when they were just weak at a certain point. Another piece of war that I often sort of neglect in European Universalis is the fort, or forts, plural of course. And they're very expensive to keep, especially in the beginning, so I often turn off my forts, even destroy them, just so I have more money to work with. And these static defenses are very bad at attacking, obviously. Also, they can just be in the wrong place to defend your land. And as we saw again with bugs in our campaign, was that sometimes the AI seems to just ignore forts. They're supposed to not be able to move through them or past them really, but there are many cases in which they still do that. And they, with the Japan patch that came in the middle of our run, supposedly Paradox fixed that issue, or they said in the patch notes, yeah, we kind of sort of maybe tried to fix an area where that error could maybe be. Turned out it didn't really seem to be fixed afterwards either. So very often our forts that we had didn't really help us defend that much. That said, there were a couple of situations in which we really would have liked more forts, because enemy armies, even if our army was stronger, would just roam around our lands and we'd have to spend time chasing them so they don't siege down our stuff, cause tons of devastation, etc. We really didn't want that. We wanted to spend the time sieging their stuff, and our army was more powerful. And what was even more problematic was enemies are often very willing to go deep into debt, by a ton of mercenaries, etc., to defend. And we would fight their army, defeat their army, go siege their capital or whatever fort they have. Meanwhile, they would raise some new troops and just run around my land and cause confusion and chaos, which is not a thing, obviously, that we want. So there were a couple of situations in which I really want to have forts. Also, as I'm going to talk about in a separate sort of segment, is we would have liked a lot more forts to defend against rebels. And we had a lot of issues with rebels early on in the campaign, and having more forts there would have helped us a ton, but we didn't. What we did towards the end, in our final fight against the Ottomans, because we knew we would have to fight the Ottomans at the end of our run, because they took some land out of Hungary. They were our ally for the whole time, but then we had to break that alliance and actually rival them in order to be able to fight them, to get stuff from them. The last couple of provinces we needed, 5 provinces I think, we needed for our achievement. Now, so we knew that this fight was coming. We had time to prepare for it. So what I did was build a chain of high-level forts around most of the Ottoman land where we didn't really want to defend. So we had this huge circle, and you'll see that on your screen, this huge circle around Ottoman land that we had conquered, and that would be a gigantic front for Ottoman armies to just walk in. And to stop that, I built these dispersed forts to just keep them where they are, give us opportunities to act them into mountains. I built a lot of forts in mountain provinces or hills provinces for defensive bonuses. Keep them at these negative areas for them while we were attacking the province that we actually wanted from them over in Hungary. So forts there were very, very useful. Early on I would have liked more forts but couldn't really afford them. Let's talk army composition. In the beginning of most Europa Universalis games, unless you're playing as a very, very large nation, you want to build mostly infantry. Not that cavalry isn't better, especially early on in the game. Cavalry is really, really strong, both because it's just pound for pound stronger than an infantry unit, but also because of the flanking that you can do in times where not everybody has armies that fulfill the full combat width. Later on, when you have these gigantic stacks fighting each other, there's no room for flanking because the army space is just full. The full combat width is being used by everything, so cavalry can't really use their flanking bonuses. But if you have smaller armies fighting each other, but yours is larger, you actually can really get something out of cavalry. That said, cavalry is very expensive. Often you don't have the larger army. And if you have the larger army, then you're already ahead. So I really don't like having cavalry early on. So I focused mostly on infantry. I got a cannon, the first technology that I could, because one cannon helps you siege a lot. But otherwise, cannons really start to become interesting at military technology 13. So that's where we started actually creating lots and lots of cannons for our army. And then it really, starting at 13 and then at 15, it becomes really, really strong, I think. You want a lot of cannons in your armies. Basically, you would like your whole back row to be cannons. It helps you siege so much faster, so you win all those siege races, and they also add a lot to combat at that time. So early army composition, infantry, 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 and then later on add as many cannons as you can. One cannon once cannons become available, and then tons of cannons at level 13 and levels 13 and 15. So it's basically the army composition I ran with for the whole run. There's a new mechanic, it's called drilling or army drill, very much connected to this idea of army professionalism. So your generals can drill the armies that they're leading, which drops off all the morale that the army has, and starts increasing a drill bar on each individual unit that increases their combat power, and also gives you what's called army professionalism, which is for your whole country, which increases the combat power of non-mercenary units. And also, what's very, very interesting, increases siege speed by quite a bit. And this was the first game I ever did with the new expansion, so I wanted to try this new mechanic out, and it turned out to be very, very useful. You have to pay your troops while drilling, so there's a big disadvantage, because usually, of course, between wars, you would turn down your army maintenance to 0 in order to save money, to actually make money to pay for the next war. This time we didn't do that at all. I think we just kept on paying our armies and drilling in between wars, which led to us having essentially almost 100% professionalism at the end of the campaign, having super powerful troops, always having this kickstart at the start of each war, where our troops were very, very drilled. That drill gets lost when they fight, because when units die, the reinforcements don't have drill, so the drill bar goes down as units get damaged. But you get this kickstart for the fights, and you get the professionalism that just keeps being there. And what we used towards the end of the campaign is super useful button. So you can always turn 5% professionalism into manpower, which then depends on it's a percentage of your maximum manpower probably. So it grows as we grow. It's extremely useful, and it's instant. So whenever you just need additional manpower, you just hit that button and do it. Now, there's supposed to be sort of a balance between mercenaries and army professionalism, and whenever you hire a mercenary unit, you actually lose some professionalism, mercenaries don't get drill, etc, etc. So this is another way of getting us away from mercenaries. What I did was still sprinkle in some mercenaries as just a use of additional manpower, because you only lose professionalism in the beginning when you buy the mercenary. It's not that much. And then if you just keep them around instead of just hiring them when you need them and then selling them again, or dismissing them again, but you just keep them around, you're sort of safe on manpower there, and it doesn't cost you any additional professionalism. So that kind of worked out really well in our army composition. There's a lot more to EU4 than just fighting wars. You also have to do things civilly to prepare for those wars, of course. But you need to do a lot of things. There are ideas, there are technologies to talk about, religion, trade. There's a segment I have about rebels, which is sort of connected to wars, but not really. And of course, the infamous estates. Ideas are pretty much at the core of the identity, I would say, of most European Universalis 4 campaigns. It is what you choose, how you shape your run. The ideas you choose make a lot of difference in how you play the game and how you design your armies, how you move forward, how you do your diplomacy, etc, etc. So let's talk about them a tiny bit. As I said earlier on, the basic ideas of Avaria are pretty bad. I mean, none of them are terrible, or most of them aren't terrible, but none of them actually do anything. We have our traditions and ambitions here. We have more manpower and more tax. Attrition for enemies is just not relevant. We have maximum promoted cultures. We have available mercenaries. We have land leader maneuver, and leader pips are good, but maneuver pips are the worst of the pips you can have on a leader. So, yes, having prestige is nice. Having legitimacy is nice. Having tradition is nice, but none of these really do much in the whole run. And cavalry compatibility, while it can be good, doesn't really go with my playstyle of not using a lot of cavalry. So overall, our ideas pretty much didn't do much at all. So we had to make good choices of idea groups to make up for that deficit. And I don't always do this because it's hard to start with an administrative idea group while you're trying to core newly conquered land. But if you manage to do that, there are 2 administrative idea groups which really pay off if you get them very early. One of these is innovative ideas because of the technology cost reduction you get from it, and the what's the other thing? Well, you got a lot of other things, but the technology cost reduction is the one you really want early on for it to make sense. And if you take innovative, as you see later on, you get a really good combination with quantitative ideas in combat. If you don't do that, there's another idea group, administrative, which is the one we took, which has especially this important part, coring cost reduction by 25%. And if you think about it, you're spending admin on the administrative idea to save admin on coring. Maybe that's not that great. But if we look at our numbers here, we look at our development, we have, what's this, 1,800 development right now. Even if they say that we only cored 1,000 of those development, and we did core a lot more, I think. But let's assume with reductions and all that, let's assume we paid full price on 1,000 development. That's 10,000 admin we had to pay for coring, which means 25% saved. It's 2,500 admin already saved just on this one single idea here. Just this core creation cost reduction. That's pretty much pays for all of these ideas already. And then you get, well, all these somewhat interesting effects. You get tech cost reduction by 10%, that's even more admin saved. You get bonus states, which is very good for income. And you also get the tech cost reduction you just get from having a lot of ideas. So this admin idea group just produced admin in the end. We got more admin out of getting this idea group than we spent on getting it. So that I think was pretty good to do early on. Then we have humanist ideas, which I mostly took to fund my expansion, to allow me to expand more without having too much unrest, because of the unrest reduction, especially because of the separatism reduction, because 10 years less separatism does not only mean 10 years less of the unrest, but also 10 less unrest actually created by separatism, which is huge. So in combination with this national unrest reduction and the idea that we have great religious unity, because having to expand a lot, we knew we wouldn't be able to convert all the land we expanded into. So just getting all this free religious unity helped stabilize our country a lot. And then of course the tolerance of other religions too. So overall, and the idea cost reduction, again saving us more points, this meant we could expand very quickly without having to think too much about rebels. After we actually finally got this idea group. Before we had lots of rebel issues, afterwards not so much anymore. And then we have 3 military idea groups, and military idea groups are sort of a flavor thing. They all have the issue that they have some great ideas in there and some ideas that are just crap. best example, I think, is Quality Ideas, which has excellent infantry combat ability here, has nice army tradition, has cavalry combat ability, has discipline and artillery combat ability, so it just improves your army so much. It's going to fight so much better, but it also has 3 ideas in there that just improve ships. We didn't even have any ships in this campaign, and even if you do have ships, these ideas are terrible. You really pick these up for these 4 ideas in the final one, and just pay for these in the middle, just so you can get through it. Similar in the other ideas here, defense has morale of armies, which is insanely good, and a lot of things that really just don't matter. And offensive, very, very similar. Plus 100% prestige from land battles, yeah, so what? But discipline, siege ability, which I love to have. And that's the idea where I said innovative ideas come in. If you combine offensive ideas with innovative ideas, you'll see down there somewhere, where is it? Plus innovative must be somewhere. Yes, third from the bottom. You get +1 leader siege pip and +10% siege ability, which makes sieges just so much better. So if you go influence, innovative ideas, starter, I think picking up offensive is very, very good. Otherwise, it's pretty much a mix and match of what you like and what you need at the current point. One thing I don't like there is picking quantity ideas, because especially once you get to the point where you fill the full combat with anyway of a fight, then having troops that fight better is much, much better than just having additional reserves that come in once your troops lose. Because if your troops don't lose in the first place, you don't need those reserves. And you just mill through the enemy's reserves because they have maybe quantity ideas, they have a lot of troops, but they are really bad. And you just nuke them down and keep on winning, and don't actually need to have a ton of troops that you would have to pay for. This having more force limit is great, having more manpower is great, but if the troops are bad and you still have to pay for them anyway, what do you want with this? So I don't love quantity at all. Naval is just naval, doesn't matter. Aristocratic is interesting, but not actually that great, I don't think. So in the end, I almost always go with the 3 we got this time, if I take 3 military ideas at all. But the order of these, and if I don't take 3, which ones I take, that differs a lot between games. Let's talk about technology and especially institutions, because with our start position over here in Avaria, we had the issue that most of the institutions, or none of the institutions, spawned near us. So if we wanted to take technology at a sort of acceptable rate, we would have to actually spawn the institutions ourselves. If we look at the institution map mode here, we can see that 4 of the institutions we've had spawned in Europe, and 1 of the institutions spawned way over here in China. So getting these to spawn in my land wasn't trivial, especially since most of the institutions only spawn through neighboring provinces, with some exceptions. Now if we look at our development map mode here, we see that there are hotspots of development in my land. My Goldman Bashkirt over here, Sarai, for example, over here. Where is it? Lahijan down here. These are all provinces in which I developed a lot in order to spawn an institution. Now, this is sort of a double-edged sword. For one, you're paying a lot of monarch points to be able to pay less extra monarch points on your technologies. So it feels kind of weird. It feels weird to pay to then not have to pay. But you're not just getting the institution spawn out of this development, you're also getting the gigantic development, which was of course especially good in the case of Bashkirt over here with the gold mine, making us a lot of money from the production. It has since depleted, so that's why it's only 8 development here. It made us a lot of money when we developed an institution there. And of course you get the more manpower, you get more taxes, you get more trade, depending on how you develop. So instead of wasting sort of your points on overspending on technology, you're instead spending the points on development and then don't have to spend as much on technology. So I think that's sort of reasonable. However, there's another issue. The other issue is that you also give your institutions to your neighbors through the spread. So once we've spawned it, most of our neighbors sort of start to spawn it as well. And these neighbors are the ones that we had big issues with, right? They were the ones we were fighting. So as long as we're all behind on technology in a war, it doesn't really matter. But we knew we had to contend with the Western powers at some point. We couldn't fall too far behind the Western powers in technology and in buildings, in development, etc., etc., etc. So if we had just focused on our part of the world, we could have fought these guys down here just as well without spawning these institutions, because they also didn't have it. But would have dropped us further and further behind these people, which we in the end had to fight. We had to go through the Commonwealth to actually take Hungary. We had to fight Hungary. We had to fight, well, almost everybody over here for a coalition war, but that's a different thing. And of course, we had to fight the Ottomans. So spawning the institutions was not that helpful in the short run, but really helped us keep up in the long run. So that's why we did that. And while we did that, we tried to not take too much technology, simply because we didn't want to pay the head of the institution's tech penalty. However, sometimes we did have to take a technology, simply because, for example, in military technology that we just needed to be able to compete in war. But in general, the idea is, when the institution spawns, maybe take 1 or 2 technologies until you have a meaningful tech penalty, then stop taking technologies, collect monarch points, develop the institution, and after that, go back and take those technologies you waited for. And it's also a really good time, once you're waiting for that institution, it's a really good time to go for ideas. So what I did, for example, at one point was take a administrative technology, even though we had tech penalty on it, because it gave us access to an additional idea slot, which we could then use to dump our other monarch points into. One thing that was really important or helpful was that we really didn't have much need for diplomatic technology in this run. Simply because diplomatic technology is a lot about ships. It's about better ships, it's about further trade range for the colonial range, etc., etc., none of which we needed. We didn't need the trade range, we didn't need the colonial range, and we didn't even have any ships. So the only real issue we had with being behind on Diplotech was that our vassals started hating us for that. But we didn't have all that many vessels throughout the game, so we were many technologies behind on Diplotech in between in the game. And it was fine, simply because we didn't need the ships or the colonialism. If you play somewhere else, you might have to focus a lot more on that. Avaria starts with the Sunni religion. And the Sunni religion is, I think in general, a really good and interesting religion. You get this piety slider you have, and you can, there's a lot of decisions and other things you can do that move you either towards the mysticism side or the legalism side of piety. And they give you, as you can see, different bonuses. If you're on legalism, you get more taxes, reduced technology costs, so a lot of sort of internal development bonuses, while if you go towards the mysticism side, you get stronger armies and you get stronger missionaries. Well, the increased fort defense, which is maybe not all that important. So I usually tend to go towards legalism if I can afford it. If my wars are going well enough that I don't need this extra 10% morale of armies, I like to go towards legalism. That's what we did in this campaign. Try to stay capped on legalism for as long as we could, just to get that tech cost reduction, save more monarch points that we could use elsewhere. And we used at least once this button to move from legalism, away from legalism, to reduce our corruption, which is just free, especially if you're close to your ruler dying, because your new ruler inherits only very little of the remaining piety. Our religion also gives us bonus chance of new heir. Sure, it's fine. Bonus cavalry to infantry ratio, which we didn't use at all, because we didn't even want to use as much cavalry. And Sunni has these schools. We had, and this is actually the bonus. Oh no, we got the bonus of +1 merchant from our school, which is fine, it's not great. You also can invite other scholars from other schools, from friendly schools. And we had the one where we could reduce our admin tech costs by a bit. However, it cost 50 admin and was really only worth it in very few edge cases, where you could actually take at least 2 admin technologies in the time that the scholar stayed around, the 20 years that the scholar would stay around. Because you save, what is it, 10%, and you have to pay 50 for it since a tech, so you have to take 2 techs in the end to make up for it. Or 5%, it's 5% you save. A tech costs 600, so you save 30 per tech.
So you have to take at least 2 tax in order to get your 50 admin back. And if you take more than 2 tax, you actually get a bonus. So it's a very, very little thing. Not particularly interesting. The others could be more interesting. 10% graphics expansion impact, sure, could be interesting. Development cost reduction could be interesting at some point. If you want to do a lot of development for institutions, for example. And shock damage bonus is just nice. But you can only do that if you're friendly with these schools, which we were not in our campaign here. So much for our religion. Maybe let's briefly also talk about our government, because it was also unique or rare, I say, and it depends on our religion too. The Iktar government is Fort of Khaganate, which gives us these 3 bonus buttons, which we can press once every 20 years, I believe, that all have a static bonus, like here plus 15% tax, 5% core creation cost reduction, which we used most of the time, so stack with our administrative ideas, or linear taxation, which we used once to get bonus diplo reputation and reduce liberty desire in subjects. And these other 2 also give you a bonus from subjects. You either get bonus manpower from your subjects, or you get some bonus tax from your subjects, which is nice whenever you press the button. Just nice, but not particularly important. These are useful. I like the Iktar government. The bonuses are comparable to a normal sort of Christian government, but it gives you these additional buttons, and pressing buttons is always nice. As with so many things, Avaria starts out in a terrible position regarding trade, because we're sitting in the Astrakhan trade node, which at the beginning of the game is almost worthless. I mean, you see now there's some value in there because we're moving a lot of money from Samarkand because we own it, and because we've built up Astrakhan a bunch. But it starts out being very, very poor, and it's the only area that you can trade in. And what's even worse, the rich Persia trade node down here does not even connect to Astrakhan, so you can't try to move the money from there into your capital city. So what we did was try to expand into Persia and then start collecting money in Persia. So we tried to get as much land as possible in the Persia trade node, just so we could actually start making money from trade. And of course, once we got over here into Samarkand, we could move a lot of the money from Samarkand, which is fed from the rich Indians in part, into our area as well. And then we also got to take Kazan over here, just to grab up some of the money that was left over. But when you start this game, you really only have, your only option is to collect here and then have somebody transfer somewhere else. I don't think you even reach Samarkand, so you just send your merchant somewhere else to give you a bit of a trade power bonus in your home node. It would of course be nice to expand into a node like Crimea maybe, but even that, Constantinople is the one where really everything flows together. So if you wanted to really make money out of this area, you would need to take Constantinople, send all the trade over here, from here, and then collect here. So you only collect in one place. But that of course means you have to take Constantinople from the Ottomans, which is a late game ambition at best. There are these new buttons in the new expansion that allow us to do something else in trade nodes, or use our trade power for something else than just profit. I have all my nodes set to maximize profit, just get more trade power. But we could have gone for increased spy network construction, kinda interesting. We could have gone for improved inland routes, which give us siege ability and artillery bonus for this fort, which is very interesting and could maybe have something to use in war if you have a lot of trade power in the node you're attacking, which of course means you already own a lot of node in that area, which again means that it maybe is not that helpful anymore, but maybe there are situations where that could be helpful. Could have gone for improved relations, which, yeah, sure. And if you're Sunni, you can also use it to propagate your religion, which we could have done this campaign, but didn't, because we had the bonus religious unity. We didn't care so much about religious conversion, we just want the money, really. As you can see in my campaign, I'm a huge believer in milking my estates. And yes, you can argue about the value and the design quality of the estates feature as such, but I really like milking them for all the monarch points I can get for them. Which means my estates are usually very close to the influence or problematic influence area of 75 75%, or well, 80%, but I always try to get them to 75 because I want to, of course, demand their support. Get 150 military power, get 150 admin or diplo power from them. In order to do that, I give them land, I click all the buttons I have to increase their influence and then take their stuff away, even if it means that they're unhappy for a while. That's sort of the main thing I use estates for. Just always milk them for their support. And of course, things like generals are always nice to have, and sometimes money in the case of the merchants, where you can just ask for cash. However, there's another use that was especially helpful in our run here. We had to do a lot of increasing of autonomy early on because of unrest issues. And if you have a high autonomy province, you basically don't get anything out of it. Because you get very high autonomy, that means you get a reduction in trade power, taxes, manpower, etc., etc., etc. Everything gets reduced, except when you give the stuff to give the province to an institution. In this case, this province is owned by the emirs, and you see down there that, or you actually don't see it. What you don't see is the important part, is that we don't get a reduction in manpower, and we don't get a reduction in force limit because of that. You can see that here. We even get a bonus on manpower from giving this province to the emirs. So you can have a very, very high autonomy province because you just raised autonomy after conquering it, getting it to, like, say, 87%. And then you give the province to, say, the clergy, and from that you get all autonomy removed for taxes. So you still get the full taxes out of the province, even though it has extremely high autonomy. And then if you choose the right provinces, high tax provinces you give to the ulema, high trading provinces you give to the merchants, of course, and high manpower provinces you give to the emirs. And suddenly the high autonomy is not as bad anymore. Another bonus is that you get local unrest reduction from the ulema. So again, with the issue of having freshly conquered land that has high autonomy and still has some unrest, you give it to the ulema, you still get your taxes, and you reduce the unrest even further. So that's another thing that estates are extremely useful for. And that's way more makes up for the problems that they make when random events fire that increase their influence above 80%. Then yeah, it's true, I have to take away some land then, but it's always manageable.
Oh boy, did I have a lot of rebels in my campaign. That's just maybe the biggest issue we had, the biggest difficulty we had in this whole thing. Sure, we had big wars, we had big coalitions, but the rebels in the beginning, quite tough. And there were quite a few ways I tried to handle them. The most important one is to stop them from spawning in the first place, mostly by reducing unrest. And I've already mentioned ways of reducing unrest in the bit about estates. You can give an estate to the ulema, a province to the ulema to reduce unrest a bit. You increase autonomy, and I just touched on this. And this is kind of the most important part. If you increase autonomy in a province, you reduce unrest by 10. You increase autonomy by 25, but you reduce unrest by 10. Now, normally increasing autonomy means you get almost nothing out of the province, but as I said, if you give it to an estate, you don't have as much of an issue there. However, there's a big and a bit complicated issue with increasing autonomy, and that is the concept of the autonomy floor and the way how increasing autonomy acts on this floor. So if you have land that you've given to an estate, it has an autonomy floor of 25%. The autonomy can never be lower than 25%. If you have land that is not stated, it has an autonomy floor of 75%. So it can never be lower than 75%. Now, if you click increase autonomy, it increases autonomy on top of the current autonomy if there is no floor, or on the top of the floor if we are at the floor. So I have a zero, say I have a 0 autonomy province that is given to the clergy. Then has 25 autonomy from the floor. If I now click increase autonomy, it goes up to 50, logical. I take away from the clergy, it's still at 50. Because it took this autonomy floor, added 25 to that and saved that as new autonomy, instead of saving, okay, there's an increase of 25. So what that means is if you take a new province and just increase autonomy once it's cored, then you almost certainly are going up to 100% autonomy because of the 75% floor. And then even afterwards, stating it and coring it won't really do anything to reduce that. So instead, what you need to do is core the province, state it, core it again, because a stated but non-full cored province has 50% floor. You core it again, you go down to 0% floor, and then you increase autonomy, and then you maybe give it to the clergy to reduce the unrest in that or something. The issue with that being that, of course, takes time to do all the coring and the stating, and you would like to increase autonomy immediately, right? If you take the land, you don't want the unrest to start spawning rebels, you just want to increase autonomy, but you can't. So this is a very delicate balance of waiting for the coring to happen and getting these huge issues with increasing autonomy on top of the high autonomy floor. And you may have to use other means to suppress rebels meanwhile, like parking your army there. It can be drilling, by the way. It still suppresses rebels if it's fully drilling, so you don't waste your time. You're still sitting around doing something with your army, which is good. By even clicking the harsh treatment button, which we had to do a couple of times in the campaign early on, just to make sure that these rebels don't spawn, by increasing stability, by, again, assigning your ulema to the province, or by grabbing a national unrest reduction advisor, and what we did in the as soon as we could, essentially grabbing humanist ideas to reduce unrest, to reduce years of separatism, and to sort of make the rebel issues go away. But before that, man, we had to have a lot of rebels running around our land, coming from our neighbors, being spawned randomly, and so on. That was no fun. But even if we had to use mercenaries once, and if we had to use harsh treatment a lot more than I'm happy to do, I'm kind of not ever happy to use harsh treatment because it's just a waste of military power, but oh well. We did it, we managed to fight those rebels off. EU4 is a complex game with a lot of interlocking mechanics, and there are a lot of interactions in the system that you can never be quite sure whether Paradox, the developers of the game, actually intended them to be used that way, or whether they're just something that came up. Is it emergent gameplay, or is it cheating if I use certain interactions? Some are pretty clearly exploits, while others are sort of in between. I don't know. I don't use things that I consider to be actual exploits in my campaigns, but I do use some tricks that may or may not be considered kosher by others. Here are some that I used. One is, and I don't think this one can actually be considered an exploit, but it's a very, very useful trick that helps fight a lot of the aggressive expansion mechanic, is to keep people peace locked that could be in the coalition against you. So usually, you know how the mechanic works. When you do things that other people consider aggressive expansion, they accrue an aggressive expansion score, which reduces their opinion of them, and this is more important, at 50 or more aggressive expansion, they have the option to join a coalition with other countries that also have high aggressive expansion values with you. So what happens then if you have enough countries that join this coalition, and either any one of them declares war on you, all of them go into this big coalition war against you. And we had 3 of them in our time here playing as Avaria. But I think we avoided a lot more because we cleverly, sort of more or less cleverly, made sure to get people peace locked, which means to have a long peace with somebody who would then who would be a would-be member of a coalition, and when that peace runs out, then their aggressive expansion, which decays over time, would have dropped off so much that they won't join the coalition anymore. And we did that a lot of time. You would see me checking in the peace deals screens, seeing who would be over 50% aggressive expansion, or over 50 aggressive expansion, and then see, oh no, these guys are peace locked, these guys are peace locked. We have 10 years here. That means we lose 30, for example, aggressive expansion, so we'll be very, very fine. They won't be able to join the coalition. So we were able to do a lot of wars that had a lot of people listed who as potential members of a coalition who never were really actually able to join a coalition against us, which is cool. You also have to, if you want to do this a lot, sort of understand aggressive expansion mechanic. Not everybody takes aggressive expansion the same way. There are many ways to reduce aggressive expansion. So peace locking potential coalition members is one thing. Another thing is we did not do that in this run, but we could have done that. We talked about doing that, is attacking coalitions while they're forming. because it's very, very hard to get people out of a coalition in a defensive coalition war. It's much easier sort of to attack a forming coalition and then get people out of that, peace lock them, and when the other people then join the coalition, maybe that coalition against you isn't as big anymore. Another trick that feels maybe a bit more cheaty is one that we did at the end of one of the coalition wars. The first big one against us was to give away mostly our allies' land in the lost war. So we lost the war, we gave up, and it was Uzbek who had declared war on us, and they definitely wanted 2 small provinces from us, so we had to give those to them in the peace deal. But otherwise, they didn't really care about what we gave them, as long as it's just war score. So instead of giving them our land, we made the Ottomans release subjects instead, which, or release land as sovereign states, I should say, instead. So what happened was we reduced the power of the Ottomans, which was actually good for us. I mean, they were our ally, but we wanted to fight them afterwards. So it was kind of good for us to reduce their power. And we didn't actually have to give up much, except for those 2 tiny provinces to Uzbek, which didn't really matter. If somebody else had declared the war, they might have had different ideas of what they actually wanted, but Uzbek didn't really want all that much for themselves. So it was very easy, and all the other guys just fought in the coalition for nothing. So that was very helpful. But again, it was our war. We lost the war. It was not really the Ottomans' fault. Is that fair to do? I think abusing the AI is what this game is mostly about, so it's probably fair. And if they don't want us to give away ally land in peace treaties, they should take away that option, or at least limit it to a percentage or something of the war score. Now to the third trick, and that is the one I feel is most exploitative. Still, I don't consider it an exploit, but it's most exploitative. Is we had a lot of events fire on us that reduced manpower. It was because we had high professionalism, I think, that somehow gets to fires a lot of events that reduce manpower. And at some point, most of the time we just took that. At some point we had very, very little manpower, we needed it, and we had another event fire that would have taken us to 0 manpower. Now, you can't go below 0 manpower. And if you start hiring troops, then your manpower goes down immediately. If you cancel those troops, you get your manpower back. And if you cancel troops within the first 10% of production, you actually get the full cost back. So when we got that event firing, I just built a bunch of troops, a couple of provinces, to spend all the money, all the manpower, sorry. Then I hit the, okay, we lose our manpower now. We couldn't lose any manpower because we didn't have any. And then I canceled the building of the troops. So I got my manpower back. So I basically hid the manpower from the event in these produced troops. There are a lot of other areas in the game where that doesn't work. Because, for example, you can go negative on monarch points. So you can't just hide your monarch points for a negative monarch point event. You cannot hide your money from a bankruptcy because it cancels all the things in production when you go bankrupt. But in this case, it's a thing you can do. And I did. Is that exploitative? You tell me. But it's definitely very useful. And finally, for my favorite category, the don't do this at home kids category. I clearly did a lot of mistakes in this run. Some I acknowledge why they happened, moving things in the wrong direction, clicking the wrong button, even taking wrong decisions at some points. But there are 2 things I want to take out here that worked out, but you really shouldn't do it. I really cannot say that you should do it. Let's start with the smaller one of the 2, was when we declared a war on Nogai, assuming that Nogai's allies, Khaganate and its subject Yarkand, would not be able to get military access to go through there. So we knew the allies had enough power in order to just defeat us, but we assumed from checking with the relations of the neighbors that Khaganate would not be able to secure military access to actually get through. So we thought we could just go into Nogai, win the war, and just have those allies sit over there in the east, not doing anything. What I didn't check, I should have checked, was that Nogai was able to secure military access, and if Nogai gets access, then by extension their allies also get access, and so Khaganate was able to walk over there and make issues in the war. We still won it,
because other people declared war on them, and we sort of maneuvered it kind of well, but it was really something you shouldn't do. And I think it was just me overthinking. It was me being overly clever, or trying to be overly clever, while not actually being it, by seeing, oh yeah, this is a big alliance, but there's this mechanic of military access and they hate them, so they won't get through, so I would easily be able to just take this war. Don't do this. I think unless you're absolutely sure and it's maybe a very easy area, sort of just one land that somebody has to get through, maybe you can think about that. But overall, I don't think you should do this sort of planning. Just don't take that war instead of doing this stuff that I did. The other one is something I did on purpose, and yet I wouldn't suggest that you do it. And that is taking on a giant coalition when I took a ton of land from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. I knew if I took all that land, I would get huge coalitions against me. I had sort of hopes that I could scare them off with the help of the Ottomans into not attacking, but it was very, very scary. And as we saw, we were not able to scare them off at all. And we had to take the fight and lose this one coalition war and then fight 2 more coalition wars to get rid of that. So you should never take such coalitions. If you have the time, and you should usually have the time in your runs, don't take those coalitions. I did it because I thought it would be exciting. I thought it would speed up the run a bit. I thought it would be very interesting for the video, and I think it was. But you shouldn't do this. If there's a big coalition against you, don't take that peace deal. Be more moderate, do more small wars. We could have just taken a little bit less and gone back to war with the PLC at some other time. We didn't. We went for the big thing, but don't do this at home, kids. And that's just about it. Thank you guys so much for watching this Popes and Pylons after action report of our Avaria game going for the Avar Khaganate. If you've liked this, please let me know. Please let me know what you liked about this kind of video, if that's the thing I should do more often. It's a lot of work. I would like to do it more often, but only if you guys actually enjoy this. In general, if you like what I've been doing on my channel, please subscribe to the channels, like my videos, and comment on anything you like or dislike down there in the YouTube comments. See you guys next time.